This is update for September 30, 2023, day 584 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for September 29. Gonna, as always, start with the sort of general strategic topics, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation on the battlefield. So as you can see, we're gonna start first with Russia. Actually, gonna be a significant topic of today's conversation or video. The map you see is the map where there are shortages, acute shortages of gasoline and diesel fuel in Russia. So as you can see, it's mostly affected sort of southern part of Russia. So for those who don't sort of kind of see the Russia, it's not showing everything that's kind of like sorry, Eastern Siberia and Russian Far East. So it's mostly I would say western part of the country. The importance that most of these regions are economically extremely significant for Russia, especially the southern region, this area around Tatarstan and so on. Well, because for example, Moscow is from truly production perspective, its value is not much. It's really just a consumer of resources, really. And then going back to this whole situation with gasoline, so on Friday prices went up again by 4%. So again, just for those who's relatively new, Russian government essentially forbid export of gasoline and diesel fuel to the world market. What that initially, it crashed the prices by about 20% for gasoline, diesel fuel inside of Russia, in the Russian internal market. Shortly out there after, they started to go creeping back up, and I think the first couple of days it was 2%. Now it's 4%. So as you can see, the market is adjusting very quickly, and the price internal price in Russia will eventually be what it is on the international market, which is roughly $1 per 1 liter of gasoline. The reason why it worked in the past, so essentially in Russia there were two. So there was one internal price which is lower, which is roughly 60 cents plus minus. I'm very generalizing. Let's say 50 cents per liter of gasoline. And the way it worked, the producers or refineries, they were compensated from the Russian government to keep lower prices inside of Russia, because otherwise it's more profitable to sell everything on the export market. And so that worked for a while in Russia. So it's kind of like illusion of prosperity that was created by Russian government to keep sort of social situation quiet. With the start of the war, the problem started to appear because military budget consume all of the resources, and the Russian government is short on resources, short on the financial resources, and so what they do, they stopped paying these refineries, basically the differential between the international market and Russian internal market. And so as a result, all of these refineries, they started selling to the international market because it's much more profitable, as you can imagine. So what Russian government is doing now, instead of admitting that it's the culprit of the problem, that's who created the problem in the first place, they shifting blame actually on manufacturing, on refineries, and to the point that they accuse them of speculation, the collusion, competitive actions, and so on. They even opening at this point administrative litigation against this producers. Probably eventually will get into criminal stuff, but basically they try to threaten them to essentially make to do loss-making decisions, which obviously will never work. And what's gonna happen? It's gonna be either shortages inside of Russia and shortages in terms of export markets, or the price will be the same as international market. But so far, Russian government tries to portray, basically, as I said, tries to shift the blame on the producers in order to kind of continue this illusion of prosperity, because even the employment and everything situation in Russia is fairly stable, because there is a lot of military orders, so the manufacturing part of the economy is working, except obviously it's not producing anything productive. It's producing military equipment, supplies, and so on. But the standard of living of average Russian went down quite significantly, and sort of keeping prices for gasoline and diesel fuel is becoming important as sort of last remaining source of illusion of stability for average Russian citizen. And so Russian government continues to sort of to sort of continue this illusion, which, as we can see, is unraveling in front of our eyes. And it's just a very good example of how actually government created the problem, or bureaucracy created the problem, and then they use this legal apparatus to actually attack the victim, actually, of the problem, because these manufacturers, they're essentially the victim, right? They're not. It's not the they're not made. They don't exist to be social enterprises. They purely focused on earning profit, and if they don't earn the profit, they will be out of the business. So there will be any production facility. But for bureaucrats, it doesn't matter. There's just bureaucratic diktat is the order of the day. This is going back to the earlier discussion, and they shared that Russia is not any kind of free market economy where it's all sort of like, I would say, a place where capitalism still thrives, and conservatives of value is still thriving and surviving, as opposed to sort of declining West. It's not the case at all. This is just Russia's propaganda, sort of facade in the West, but the reality in Russia is it's significantly relying on this bureaucratic diktat and so on. So there's nothing truly capitalistic or competitive here in this situation. And this is a case of bureaucrat mismanagement of the economy, which is happening every time they try to manage an economy, anything in economy. And it's not Russian phenomenon. It's happening everywhere, including West, by the way. So nobody's immune from that. So now let's actually move to the next topic, to the U.S. Because U.S. there, as everybody knows, there is this fiscal situation in the U.S. where there is this big discussion in the U.S. Parliament. There's big fight for the shrinking pie, basically, in the U.S. economically and financially, and it's getting to the point that there's a significant majority of Republican Party at this point is against continuing help for Ukraine. So Republican Party in the lower chamber of the U.S. Parliament, it's I think 218 or 19 members, and it's very slim majority. So about 117 of those are not supporting continuing help to Ukraine for various reasons. The most important reason is the situation economically is not going in the right direction in the U.S. On the surface, yes, GDP is growing and so on, but if we look at what's going on with the health of the fiscal health of the U.S. or state budget, it's not looking good. I made a video a while ago, but I just want to highlight key sort of like problem areas and what's going on, the biggest concerns in the U.S. So this is a table for the collections of taxes for U.S. Federal budget, and then also expenses from that budget. So as you can see, this is for 11 months out of 12. So it's pretty representative for the entire year. The year starts on October 1. So this is everything through August included of 2023. So as you can see, the whole total collections are roughly 4 trillion US dollars, and the expenses are roughly 5.5 trillion. Right? So there is a whole of 1.5 trillion, which is huge, as you can imagine. The bigger actually problem is, if you look at this, that the main source actually in the US, unlike many countries, of the revenues for the government is actually personal taxes, so basically taxes on individuals. So corporations essentially don't pay much of a taxes in the US, and if you look at all other taxes, is actually very small as well, to the point that actually there is a question if it's administering those taxes probably take the same amount of resources that those taxes are collected. So there is a question why even, what's the point? But if we go back to the sort of bread and butter of US revenue for the US government, you can see that individual income taxes, which is the main source, is actually down relative to the prior year, and down quite significantly, roughly 20%. That's not sort of normal, especially given that nominally economy is growing and things are not sort of going bad. The job market, as I shown in the previous videos, remains strong. So, for example, on Thursday there was again data in US, and just a very clear picture that unemployment is low in the US and job market looks strong. But at the same time, we're observing this individual income taxes are going down, and quite significantly. This is not it's not a picture that sort of corroborate the story of the strong job market and so on. At the same time, if we look at this social insurance and retirement receipts, basically employment in general, retirement, this is taxes that are levied on the salary of whoever earns whatever, and it goes into basically pension fund, and in the US it's called Social Security, but essentially it's one big pension fund. So this actually is up, as you can see, which is consistent with the picture that there is increasing employment and it remains high. There is no recession in employment. So the only way to square the top, which is individual income taxes, is that in the US job market, it's significant deterioration in terms of quality of the US job market, where there are fewer and fewer high-paying, high-quality jobs. So basically, majority of jobs. So there's sort of invisible, in some ways, probably recession in this white-collar, high-quality jobs, where high-paying, you paid relatively high wages or salaries. And it's basically the job market is drifting into low quality jobs that pay relatively low income. This is the only explanation to this whole situation, and that's really a pretty very bad sort of structural change. When recession hits, this is going to be a really combustive, ugly picture. So what, in other simple way, is what I'm trying to say is that middle class and upper middle class is being destroyed in the US, and pretty fast pace, as you can see, because it's negative 20%. The other problem in the US and with the budget is that, as you can see, net interest is 68 billion, let's call it 69 billion per month. This was in August of 2023. So if we annualize it, that really means roughly slightly more than 800 billion US dollars of annual interest expense, and it continues. The interest rates are continuing going up, so we kind of already looking in the rear view mirror with this number. So if we look at September, it's probably going to be like 70 or 71 billion. So it's going to be even higher than what I'm trying to say, and that's really, if you look at them. So that's going to be roughly 850 billion US dollars out of 4 trillion. So it's almost getting close to like quarter of the actual cash collections or cash revenues of the budget are going to pay interest expense. And the reason I'm so much focused on actual collections, not this bloated number 5.5, is because ability to continue this, let's say, spending in excess of actual cash collections will be significantly diminished, and actually probably will be forced to basically to become non-existent for the U.S. because the interest expense is becoming so high that it's going to be essentially suicidal to continue deficit spending through the budget in the U.S. and also it will push up inflation, which is already high, and which is, as I said, if job market is shifting to low quality jobs and you have inflation, this is social unrest. This is straight situation towards social unrest and revolution, or whatever you call it. So situation, this whole budget, and this is obviously the fiscal situation is very, I would say it's not ugly yet, but looks really bad. And that's why there is this strong push against helping Ukraine. It's, there's different rhetoric, like we need to, defend the border in the US, in the South, or whatever, immigration, or there are different reasons. But the real true reason is because US is approaching this disastrous fiscal situation in the near future, maybe within a year or so. It's hard to predict, but it's clearly on a collision course, and the ability to finance is going to be significantly diminished. And so this political struggle is really reflection of deteriorating financial health in the of the U.S. State budget, but it's also a reflection of the problems, deeper problems in the economy, as I showed with the situation with the labor market. Now let's move to the next topic. It's going to be closer to Ukraine. So Ukraine is getting a couple of these pieces of equipment. It's called Skynex, made by Rheinmetall. The reason I'm bringing this up is just because this is example of the pervasive problem in the Western military industrial complex, which I mentioned many times before, that there is a problem with monopolization, because essentially Rheinmetall is monopolist in Germany. The same exists in the US. I think there are a couple of the companies there. There is the same situation is in the UK. BAE is essentially a monopolist there. Then the same very similar situation in France, Nexter, and so on. And the problem with all of these monopolists is essentially they cannot produce everything cost efficiently. Everything is insanely expensive. It's almost any piece of equipment, A, takes forever to make, B, it costs a fortune. So you cannot fight mass war, which is what it is. It's going on in Ukraine with this type of approach. You cannot just have like 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of equipment because they're not that efficient. So that's sort of so first problem is this absence of economical analysis of what's actually being produced, because if it's insanely cost inefficient, it's just simply not gonna work. You just cannot have enough of this on battlefield, so essentially you have shortage of the military equipment, and it's not compensated by the quality. So basically the ratio of quality to cost is extremely unfavorable in this situation. And let me explain why. So this shell here, it costs $4,000 or euros, roughly the same thing, per one. On average, well, estimates that it takes at least 2 shells, up to 4 shells, to destroy UAV, right? Let's say Russian UAV, whether it's going to be, let's say, Landsat or LAN, and actually I'll explain why it's actually not possible with those, but let's assume, or actually FPV UAV, which is first-person view, which is kamikaze or attack drones widely used by at this point by Russian army, which create huge problems on a sort of individual level. So if you really think, so let's take it takes 2 shells to destroy 1 UAV. So for example, FPV costs like $500. So you spend $8,000 to destroy something that costs, $500. So that's so basically, even just simply if you want to win the war, you just create a lot of these FPVs and send against this unit, and it just simply will chew all of the money, and you're going to be bankrupt in a short order. And you simply lose, not because any of those FPV will hit you. And let's assume this is perfect piece of equipment, which it does look like it's a great piece of equipment, but it simply will destroy a lot of them, but eventually it simply will run out of shells because you don't have money to own those shells, and that's what's called war of attrition. So that's one first problem. Again, this is economic problem, absence of really thinking of how this is going to work. The second is why it's, again, there's more problems. So it's basically what I'm trying to, the reason I picked it up, because on the surface it looks really like a pretty cool piece of equipment and so on. But in reality, if you really take it from a practical perspective of the battlefield, is actually, I would say, disaster. And so the next sort of problem with that is that if you look the distance is 4 kilometers. So let's say if you want to destroy Orlan 10, it's 5 to 6 kilometer altitude. So you're not going to be able to do that. And that's one of the biggest sort of problems. So you cannot do FPV because it's uneconomical, right? So it's $500, and Russia produces them, this FPVs, that the production rate ramped up to like 10-20,000. They can produce annually, probably more. This is the lowest number. I would not be surprised if this is a much higher number than what I'm trying to say. Another dangerous piece of Russian equipment, which is, again, UAV or LAN 10, you simply cannot get there. So it's 5-6 kilometers versus you have 4 kilometers, right? So and then Landsat, that's another piece that's dangerous and creates a lot of problems. Now let's actually look at the radar. So here radar is X-band, and if I understand, the X-band is 8 to 12 gigahertz, basically frequency, detection frequency. What none of these Russian pieces of equipment in that X band. So, for example, FPVs, they use 5.8 gigahertz. Just one of their frequencies, not all, but like one frequency for video signal. Arlan is using 900 megahertz, so 0.9 gigahertz, just to confirming that. Lancet is using the same, roughly 900. They also have mid 800 megahertz, so they are actually two channels. So as you can see, you cannot even like effectively do anything. This radar is designed for, I don't know what it is designed for, but it's not really anything practical to what's going on the battlefield. So in some ways, the way this piece of equipment, which is by itself from probably point of view engineering, is good piece of equipment, but it's completely unusable. It's completely sort of like made like by people being in like outer space, not from engineering perspective, but from conceptually what it's trying to address, how much it costs. It's completely irrelevant, and not to mention that it costs 90 million US dollars. So this is just a perfect example of the problem with monopolized military equipment manufacturing industries, and that's a problem in the West. Why it's not, and why it's a problem? Because in Russia, while they do have large monopolies for, let's say, tank manufacturing or artillery manufacturing and so on, a lot of the sort of like more like high-techy stuff is being produced by small to medium companies. They're much better at understanding what's needed and doing it in a cost-efficient way. And just that structure of this military-industrial complex in Russia is by itself advantage relative to the West, and that's a big problem, I would say. And the same situation with China, because China relies on a lot of small and medium companies for its manufacturing capabilities. Final assemblies can be done by large companies, but there's a lot of, it's much more vital in a way. Economic, landscape in China and Russia is more vital than in the West in this military-industrial complex, and that's really huge. Huge problem if there is any real direct hot war between the two blocks. Now let's. I'm gonna talk a couple more things about Russian economy. So first of all, the Russian currency continuing its slide down. It dropped to 98 Russian rubles per US dollars. Again, this is a result of war spending, where Russian government is essentially creating currency to finance war expenses that's not backed by anything, and it's really destroying Russian currency and destroying economic wealth of Russian citizens. That's how people pay for the war. And that's another reason why Russian government continued attempting to keep the gasoline prices low, to at least have sort of like at least some kind of buffer to sweeten sort of general deterioration in the quality of life in Russia. One other thing is I mentioned that Russia has two kind of like workhorses of the economy where the value add or profit is generated. One is being export of crude oil, and the one used to be export of natural gas. So natural gas was monopolized in Russia, and was being done by Gazprom. And I mentioned that that's essentially dead, and just they released some financial data, and it's showing that their natural gas extraction or production went down by 25% in the first half of 2023. It's obviously, we're looking in the rear view mirror. Things are at this point probably deteriorating much worse. So if I don't want to speculate, but it's definitely more than 25%. And essentially that company is unprofitable and effectively bankrupt. May still be cash flow because it has huge pile of cash from prior years, from prior Fed years. But if it were sort of, if we looked at it on a cash, from a accrual perspective, it's essentially bankrupt. And that part of Russian sort of one workhorse is essentially that. The only one that's Russia is relying fully is crude oil, and because of the, as I mentioned before, misguided policies in the West, price of crude is pushing $100 per barrel. Not for the Russian crude yet, but for example for the crude oil from Saudi Arabia, from Azerbaijan, so better quality ones. It actually touched $100 per barrel, and does not look sort of good in the long run either. Now let's move closer to the battlefield. First, I forgot to mention in previous video, there is sort of news, which is completely wrong news, that Wagner Group is back on the front line in Ukraine, in Bakhmut area. That's actually not correct. It's not a Wagner Group. So basically, what it is in Wagner Group, there was a person who was sort of like a mole from the Russian government to kind of like watch things to make sure everything's under control, or basically inform Russian KGB and so on. And I'm not even saying directly KGB, just in the whole sort of ecosystem of this intelligence agencies. And that was his job. He was totally, how to say, culturally foreign to the Wagner Group. He was, as I said, the best description is a mole who was there to observe things. And so now Russian government decided to kind of like present him as sort of one of the original leaders of the Wagner Group, which is he's totally not even close. He was basically like sort of outcast, never was part of true Wagner leadership, and so essentially they say that he's bringing Wagner Group to Bakhmut front line, which is again not true, because this is essentially Russian Minister of Defense basically creating a facade or appearance of Wagner Group. In reality, is a typical typical organization created by Russian Minister of Defense with all of its shortcomings, and has nothing to do with Wagner Group or its abilities and so on. So it's basically false, how to say, basically a lie. Let's put this way, in very simple, direct way. So hopefully I addressed that question. And then there is another one that's just recent one, and this UK Minister of Defense said that they're going to send troops to train Ukrainian troops directly in Ukraine, and they may even send UK warships into the Black Sea to protect cargo and export of grain from Ukraine. So there is some hysterical people starting to say it started World War III. It's definitely not start of World War III. It's definitely closer to escalation. It's definitely not a de-escalation of the situation. I'm not gonna say that, but it's clearly not start of World War III, or not even. It's not imminent. Let's put even this way. What's really happening? What's the driver by those two decisions? Is it's much cheaper to send like 100 trainers or 200 trainers to somewhere to Ukraine, to Western Ukraine, so they train Ukrainian troops. So you don't need to spend tons of money to first of all bring Ukrainian troops, where you bring, let's say, 10,000 to the UK. It costs a lot of money. You have to house them. Everything is so much more expensive. and UK is facing also significant financial problems on a state level, economy-wise, and everything, right? So it's very logical decision should have been done, in my view, a long time ago, where the trainers actually located in Ukraine. There's no point to saying, you know, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers on expensive trips, where you can save that money to spend it on some other helpful activities, whatever they are. So that's hopefully addresses one point. The only problem is, which is true, that Russia can attack with missiles, those training areas, which happened in the past, because it's not very thoughtful how it's organized, because there's a lot of people in the same area, and it's becoming perfect target. So hopefully that's not gonna happen. Then it's more or less okay. The other part is the UK warships in the Black Sea. I'm somewhat skeptical that's actually going to happen, because the problem is not the cargo ships. The Russia is actually not attacking any cargo ships that go to Ukrainian ports. Never happens. What they do attack, and that's actually for that reason they don't attack those ships, because they don't want to provoke any international conflict and actually escalate the conflict beyond just attacking directly Ukraine. So what they do, they continuously attack Ukrainian port infrastructure, which is I'm mentioning, and it's being devastated. And UK warships are not going to protect against that by any means. So we'll see what happens there. But if there are UK warships, that's obviously going to be a significant escalation and significant sort of danger of direct military conflict, because even though Russian Black Sea fleet is essentially done and non-existent, obviously those UK ships can be by accident attacked by the Russian missiles, because that's really happening, for example, with Romania. I explained that Russia is attacking Ukrainian ports on the Danube River Delta, and basically one side of the river is Ukrainian, the other opposite side is Romanian, and because you cannot do it that perfectly precise, sometimes those either missiles or UAVs, they get into the Romanian territory. So far, it was kind of like accepted by Romania without really creating, too much sort of discussion, because nobody wants to have direct military conflict. So they kind of accept the situation. So we'll see how it all develops. It's definitely not sort of, call it positive news that things are de-escalating, but everybody is fully aware that this war is totally not on de-escalation path by any means. Oh, and then there's another news out of Russian MOD, which they continuously stating that there will be no mobilization, no new round of mobilization in Russia, which we'll see. I don't buy it. I think there will be one, but they may try to delay it for as long as possible. As I explained before, the economic social situation inside of Russia is getting more gloomier, and having mobilization on top of it is obviously creating more combustible social situation in Russia, and there's no desire to do that by Russian political top. They're trying to push off that moment for as far as possible. Now let's actually walk through the front line, as I always do, in a clockwise fashion. Situation along the state border remains more or less the same, no essential differences. There are some incursions into Russian territory, but they are just, call it propaganda actions. They're not really meaningful from a military perspective. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are essentially quiet. Nothing major is happening here. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Northern sector is pretty quiet. It's just tactical attacks, but small scale, totally small scale, not even worth mentioning. The only anything major tactical is happening is around this Klishivka, where Russian troops are trying to actually counterattack, which indicates that they have reserves and good amount of those, because I mentioned before that 72nd Brigade was significantly decimated, to lesser extent 31st. Obviously, force is worn out. It's not totally decimated, but it's definitely worn out. Yet Russian command is able to launch counterattacks. They're not successful, but nevertheless they have resources, which indicates that they do have reserves somewhere in the back in this area. Otherwise, there is nothing else going on here. Let's look at central Donbass front line. Things here a little bit more active. There's this, looks like there's desire by Russian command to expand this salient to basically create even more dangerous situation for Ukrainian salient in Avdiivka, where you're more outflanked. So far attacks were not successful, but it's clear what's the goal of the Russian military command. And then sort of traditional Russian attacks in Mariinka, which lead to nowhere. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line, which used to be active, where there was so-called offensive. It's not really true offensive, but that was where Ukrainian forces attempted to make some decisive moves, but so far everything is turning into World War I type of squeeze and basically meat grinder. The situation remains quiet on this section of the front line for past, I don't know, I want to say at least a week or more, maybe even 10 days, but so far things are not sort of moving in either direction by either side here. Now let's switch to last section of the front line, which is along Dnipro River. Things here are quiet. The only sort of administrative change is that looks like Russian command replaced commander of 205th Brigade, which there were a lot of complaints about the incompetence of the person. And to the credit of Russian command, it looks like they actually learned and made the right decision for themselves, which is obviously a negative sign for Ukraine, because it means that you may get much more capable commander to deal with. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time.